ride for it, I'ma organize for it. Stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it. Heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it. Peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it. Work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it. Stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it. Heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it. Peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it.
Hello, peace. Welcome back to the Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast. This is GP Jacob, Jake Verdon. Today we're talking about housing in the context of the Upper Harbor Terminal. One of the most stirring aspects of the Upper Harbor Terminal development is the potential for building housing on site. Some want high-end, luxury, market-rate housing. Others want deeply affordable housing for the neighborhood, and passions run high when the issue is raised. There are a lot of conversations about housing happening right now in Minneapolis. Everyone seems to agree that we're in a housing crisis. Rent and home prices are skyrocketing while more and more people are pushed into homelessness or out of the city to find something like affordable housing. The population in Minneapolis has boomed over the last 5 years, and that trend is expected to continue. Anyone who grew up here can tell you that the landscape has changed dramatically. New condos and luxury apartments have sprung up like mushrooms after a rainstorm in many sections of the city. In the Northeast neighborhoods where I was raised, this boom in new construction has coincided with the displacement of many working-class families and businesses. Many at City Hall and liberal circles around the country, however, point towards Minneapolis' recent doing away with single-family zoning as a great victory for housing advocates, arguing that the barrier removed to building more units will somehow someday bring the price down and put a dent in racial segregation that's built on the redlining of single-family home neighborhoods. One of, if not the, most hotly contested and discussed issue in Minneapolis and many cities across the nation. The proposition to build housing at the Upper Harbor Terminal gives us a chance to dig into the production of housing in general, break down the various arguments for the best ways to build and preserve housing for the working classes, and then lay out a roadmap for how we get there. The term affordable housing is a loaded one. In Minneapolis today, if somebody uses the phrase affordable housing, what they are probably referring to are privately owned buildings with a percentage of units that are subsidized using a tax credit method. Tax credit affordable housing is a market-based scheme for building housing that has largely taken the place of public housing since the 70s and 80s. Basically, it works like this. The government, city, state, federal, or combination, offer a private developer a nice tax break if they will set aside a certain amount of units to be rented below market rate. The number of units and the threshold of affordability depends on the specific project, and these affordability requirements have an expiration date. The developer agrees to keep the units affordable for a 15 or 20-year period, and after that they can charge whatever they want for the rent. All the affordability requirements are waived. It's important to step back and put this model for building quote-unquote affordable housing in context. The low-income tax credit model shifted responsibility and ownership of affordable housing to the private sector. It opened up what was previously a publicly held housing stock to private financial interests. This shift away from public investment in housing was a part of a broader shift in the U.S. political economy to shrink the public sector and to subsidize the for-profit private market. This shift that started in the 70s and then really took off under Ronald Reagan is known as the neoliberal turn. This pro-market neoliberal ideology has been the economic orthodoxy of both political parties ever since. Neoliberalism is a right-wing economic ideology that promotes the private for-profit market as the best way to organize economic life. Neoliberal economics seeks to privatize and commodify all aspects of life, from healthcare to education to water to war, to transit, to housing. The starving of public housing agencies through constant budget cuts coincided with a media attack on welfare queens and the constant fear-mongering about black super predators in the inner city. This manufactured crisis was intended to reduce resistance to the destruction of public housing. While investments in public housing were being slashed, so were the budgets for public education at every level. So were the budgets for public art programs, for public assistance of various kinds, for healthcare, etc. I want to set this context because without it, it's hard for us to perceive that our conversations around housing, the best way to build and manage housing, even in Democrat-dominated cities like Minneapolis, are held in a very right-wing context. Quote-unquote affordable housing is not the same as public housing. Tax credits to private developers are not the same as housing built directly by the public sector, managed outside of the private profit market with no time limits on affordability. Public housing in the U.S. is also a loaded topic. Many people might hear public housing and think of under-resourced high-rises and concentrated poverty. This perception is the result of the intentional underfunding and sabotage of public housing in the United States and racist media stereotypes designed to instill fear and mistrust of poor people, of black and brown people, and of the public sector at large. Despite being intentionally handicapped and neglected in the USA, public housing still provided millions of families and provides millions of families with safe and affordable homes and has been a crucial aspect in maintaining dignity in the life of working people in cities, suburbs, and rural communities across the nation. The ideological war against the public sector in general and public housing in particular means that when we talk about addressing the housing crisis we face today, there's an orthodoxy at City Hall that stops at public-private tax break style affordability schemes. Public housing is considered a no-go, but it's exactly where we need to go. The best way to build high-quality, affordable housing in Minneapolis is to cut out the private developers and their profit margin. For the city to directly finance the construction of apartment buildings on public land. We need a revolution in public housing in this country, and the model we should look to is social housing. Municipally rooted, mixed income, sustainable, and attractively designed public housing. Unlike the means-tested model that is traditional in public housing in the United States that allows only the very poor to access housing subsidies, and it over-monitors the lives of public housing tenants, social housing is mixed-income public housing available to all and structured on a solidarity rent basis. This means that everybody can apply to live in and benefit from publicly held housing. It means that many units will be deeply subsidized and affordable to the poorest in our society permanently, but it also means that units will be available closer to market rate for those that can afford them. The most frequent response you'll get when advocating for public housing is that the federal government has just given up on it, that the money to fix what we have or to build more is just not there. This fatalist attitude must be rejected. Cities have to take the lead on building social housing, and there are tools that can be used at the municipal level to begin construction now while we organize to gain support at the federal level. If the public sector can raise hundreds of millions to finance stadium deals, why can't we build the best, most attractive, most sustainable apartment buildings in the city? The best place to start building social housing is on city-owned land. And guess what the Upper Harbor Terminal is? City-owned land. There's no reason to sell the land off to private interests and then have to turn around and subsidize those private interests so they could provide some modicum of affordability. Instead of selling land to a private developer, the city should directly finance the construction of housing on land that it already owns, immediately driving down the cost of construction. The private, profit-driven rental market cannot provide for the housing needs of our city. The private, profit real estate market is the driving force behind gentrification, displacement, and homelessness. Quote-unquote affordable housing, tax break schemes to incentivize private developers to offer a few cheaper units doesn't cut it either. These are crumbs thrown to us off the fat cat's table.
To coin a phrase, my dear counsellor, rob the poor to feed the rich.
We need to start from the assertion that housing is a human right, and the city, county, and state should be using our public dollars to build high-quality housing for all. Cutting out the profits of private developers lower the rent. If the city directly financed the construction of an apartment complex on public land, the revenue generated from rent could pay back construction costs and then be cycled back into a cooperative financial instrument for the tenants, yielding dividends every year, collective public ownership, wealth building. I believe that the tenant justice and cooperative economic movements catching fire again in Minneapolis and many other places must be a cornerstone for a new social housing bloom. Public finance, construction, and ownership of new apartment buildings is about shifting ownership and return of investment to the renters, to the people who live in the building, rather than absentee landlords and big money developers. Like all substantive change, a housing justice movement has got to come from the bottom up. The difference between tax credits to private developers and social housing is the difference between capitalism and socialism, and it really matters. The working classes deserve to be able to live in and around this city. We deserve a sense of security and a return on our investment. The private, for-profit real estate market leaves us always on the edge of a knife, fearing a rent hike, a new owner coming to flip the building, and our hard-earned rent money just goes to line the pockets of an absentee landlord. A new social housing program coming out of a bottom-up tenant power movement can bring the working classes wealth and security that we haven't experienced in my lifetime. Parcels of city-owned land, like the 48 acres at the Upper Harbor Terminal site, are the perfect opportunities to start trying these innovative models that have poor people and oppressed people at the center and really have a strategy for changing the wealth and power dynamics in our economy. Selling this land, which is the basis of economic development, selling this city-owned land to United Properties, to a private developer, to this private developer in particular, is getting off on the wrong foot. That's giving up the bag from the start. I'm expecting this episode to drop August in 2019. I hope you're hearing it sometime soon, late summer, fall of 2019. These conversations are in motion right now. The Upper Harbor Terminal Community Planning and Engagement Committee is discussing housing options. So if you hear this, figure out how to show up to the next meeting. Figure out how to get involved. Start reading. Start figuring it out. We got to fight like hell for the Upper Harbor, but whatever happens at the Upper Harbor, we got to use this as a learning moment. It's happening right now. The city's slipping out of our hands. Big capital coming in, big money coming in, big pressure to move coming in. And it's not just about the city. It's anywhere where poor people and working class people are looking to change their situation, to get some security in their life, in their housing, to get around fresher, more fly designed, sustainable buildings where we have power and we're building wealth. We got to jump on this housing justice train, and we got to start looking at development seriously and building out and building capacity to actually manifest a different model, a cooperative model, a socialist model. Enough of this low income tax credit, incentivize private developers and let the market figure it out. That's dead. That's really dead. So that's it for today. That's the housing intro. I'm sure we'll come back to this topic many times. Money, power, land, solidarity.
We need money, land, solidarity. If you funny, stand very far away from me. We have running plans about as far as they can see to keep them coming. Bands building up the company. Shauna told me I was gonna be prosperous. I listen. I'm just praying, make a place a positive addition. Try to knock me off my spot would be preposterous. I'm fishing in this bitch, illuminate like phosphorus. I glisten, gliding like a Christ on the water. Now you're christened, sliding like I'm ice over top the opposition. Hold a vision in my mind and make it pop about fruition. Expanding these demands and will not crowd the propositions. Guaranteed the whole mood. The rest, you're gonna inherit the earth.